How are you?
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, everybody. I guess we're still reeling from this morning.
Not over.
No, not by far. I wanted to ask Dr. Portler if there was anyone else going to be presenting with you.
Nope, it'll just be me.
All right. I'm having terrible allergy. I hope I don't get a cough attack during the meeting.
Going around, Cynthia.
I know, it's terrible. I think I might
Allergies
water.
are very bad. Do you take anything for it, Cynthia?
Yes, Claritin.
Mm.
Did you hear me, Beverly?
I heard you.
Cynthia,
Okay.
at 6 p.m., I'm going to start the webinar, and we should see attendees start to join.
Okay. If it's okay. Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Carmen.
Hi,
Can you
Carmen.
see me?
Hi, Carmen.
Hi.
Carmen is a committee member, new committee member.
No, welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's see. Julio's going to be joining us, right?
I don't know. I have not heard from him on this.
Yeah,
I'm
because
here.
who's that? Because
Vice Chair is here.
I was thinking that Julio's committee, the youth committee, was going to be partnering with me on this.
That's not how I have it listed here. I just have it as a health committee meeting.
I
Okay,
remember seeing an email that had.
I did see the email, him requesting it be joint.
Wasn't there another meeting you have coming up, though, at the end of the month? Is that the one?
Yeah, but that didn't involve youth. That's why he wanted to be part of it.
I don't recall what that one is.
Yeah, well, that's okay. No, because I know that he really wanted to be a part of, I probably had questions about the study.
No, we could share those anyhow, and he'll be able to watch the presentation as well.
Right. Okay.
Jeremy, would it be worth reaching out to him after the meeting and just maybe setting something up?
Sure, we could absolutely do that.
Okay, thank you.
Cynthia, when you're ready to start, just ask me to call roll.
I'm ready. Okay. We have enough participants at this point. I think we can move forward.
Okay. So I'm going to mute everyone. Good evening. Committee members, I am going to call your name. When I call your name, please unmute yourself, acknowledge I've called your name, and then mute yourself again. If you are a board member but not a committee member, I am not going to call your name, but I will write your name down. Cynthia Gonzalez.
Here.
Thank you. Pat Ruiz.
Here.
Thank you. Griselle Amador. Joan Body.
Here,
Thank you. Cynthia Felix. Anthony Giglio. Christina Lem. Arelis Martinez. Gloria Rodriguez Navoa. Carmen Rivera. Dr. Rivera, I know you know how to use unmute because you did it before. Would you just unmute yourself? I'm going to help you then. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Mute. Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
thank
I'm
you.
here.
Thank you. I just wanted to get you used to the controls. And I see joining us, I called her before, but Griselle Amador,
Here.
thank you. Roll is called.
Cynthia, you have to unmute
Cynthia, you're
yourself.
muted. Still muted. Do you need help?
Why do
There
we,
you go.
why do I do this to myself? Let's take it from the top again. My name is Cynthia Gonzalez, and I'm the chair of the Health and Mental Health Committee at Community Board 7. And we may possibly be joined later on by our Youth Committee chair, who is Julio Peña III, but I'm not sure that he will be joining us. I know that he wanted to. Today we have Dr. Nathan Vega Portler. He is a psychiatry resident and researcher with NYU Langone. Dr. Portler is leading a research study focusing on resilience and mental health of teenagers of Chinese and Mexican heritage in Sunset Park, with a focus on US-born children of immigrants. So the NYU Child Study Center is a part of the NYU School of Medicine. They aim to improve the mental health and well-being of children and families through research, training, clinical care, and community partnerships. That being said, there's going to be a lot of questions about the study. So I think I'm going to start with some of the questions that I believe that will come up so that Dr. Portler can prepare if he needs to. So, is the study considering the teens as an at-risk population? Because at-risk involves the following, and it's a lot. It's economic, it's the absence of support, parents or otherwise, network, culturally, geographically isolated people. They also might be requiring additional support to be independent, physically, mentally, the developmentally disabled people who have issues of substance abuse, vision, hearing impaired, or people that have difficulty reading, speaking, or understanding English. So will the study address these risk factors? Is that what you're looking for? And then who will the data be shared with? Those, I guess, are the preliminary things that I know that you probably have a presentation on what it will cover, but my first question is, are you covering this particular population because you see them as an at-risk population?
So just to start off, I just want to thank you all for having me here. Is the audio okay? Okay.
Yes.
So as you mentioned, my name is Dr. Nathan Vega Portler. I'm in the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry research track at NYU, which is a new track, as you mentioned, through the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry department. Meaning I both have clinical duties and training as well as protected time to do community-focused research. I want to just first, your question is a extremely important one. I want to first just acknowledge, incident that happened today and how appreciative I am for you all giving time and space and energy to talk about this, which is certainly a relevant piece of of what so many in the community must be going through and processing and looking for support amongst each other in this horrible incident. And so I just want to first acknowledge, give space for that, and also express my gratitude for being able to be here remotely with you all. So in answer to your question of whether the sort of the philosophy and perhaps the motivation for the study, so for me as a Latino psychiatrist in training who grew up in New York and Brooklyn, it was something that was personally very relevant, something I felt very strongly about, understanding the aspects of the immigrant experience as generations continue after resettlement. And then also, obviously, teen mental health is an area clinically that I also am very passionate about. And so the way that I sort of frame this particular study is really focusing on resilience as well as mental health needs, meaning that rather than just a sort of deficit approach to how teens navigate the stressors that they face through development and through their lives, I also want to explore the sources of support, the resilience that they themselves have, that they find within their communities. And so that's a really key component of the study and a motivation for it. In terms of the specific demographics, I guess you sort of highlighted of why these particular populations, obviously in Sunset Park is a very vibrant and critical community and has a strong immigrant population. And the Chinese and Mexican immigrants being two of the largest country of origins of the immigrants in Sunset Park, as you know. And so one of the particular reasons why I also wanted to look at these two populations is given that across the United States, both China and Mexico are the largest countries of origin of immigrants. And there are certain aspects of their experience that share some commonalities. Familismo in general among Latinx populations, including Mexicans, and filial piety among some East Asian groups, including Chinese. And so looking at these two communities together, being able to see some of the commonalities of experience as well as some of the differences. So that was a bit long-winded, but I hope I addressed at least some of some of what you were asking about.
No, well, my primary question was, okay, your study is on resilience, but you're really, I guess, trying to explore what supports they have that make them. I mean, what is the study based on? That's why I asked if you felt, if the study was motivated by your feeling that this is an at-risk population, because you know that mental health involves all of the things that I outlined when I first spoke to, the first one being economic. Obviously, people don't have a roof over their head, they're food insecure. What I mean, does the study, what is the study going to look at it with this population?
Yeah, no, I think your point is well taken, right? Mental health is not, I think, sort of in many mainstream conversations when talking about mental health, it's often portrayed as an individualistic kind of responsibility that somebody has. And all of these other things are so critical to thinking about mental health and thinking about development, including being in a community or a demographic that is economically deprived, having housing instability, occupational hazards and not being able to advocate for safe working conditions. All of those things are absolutely critical to an individual when we're thinking about an individual's mental health. And so in terms of what is included in the survey, the things that we're focusing on are things like, for example, so economic status, there's there are some questions we have about that, but there's in the literature, there's some questions that get at it, not based on like, what is your family's income? Because a lot of teens don't necessarily know that. But there's some things like the MacArthur social status ladder. And so there are questions that are getting to that. There are questions about getting to changes in family sort of economic situation, particularly taking into account the pandemic, things like job loss, things like financial stress, questions that relate to, for example, stress related to perception of immigration policy, stress related to, and both stress and positive aspects, so negative and positive aspects that may be associated with, having to interpret for one's family members or loved ones who don't speak English, because it can be, both a source of pride and way of connecting with one's heritage and family members, as well as potentially some stressful components to it as well. So, there are definitely questions that are touching upon a broad range of topics, but primarily things that sort of relate to the experience of second generation immigrant youth. And some of these were informed by conversations with, service providers in the Sunset Park community that we've been in conversation with, and trying to make it as relevant as possible. But the overall goal is, with these findings, that we hope that it can be used to inform the development of services or programming to help support teens, within the Sunset Park and neighboring areas, or help inform policy strategies for engaging them.
So this is basically a survey, but then you have another component where people will be interviewed. Am I right about that?
Correct. So there's three components to it. There's we call interviews with key informant, who are direct service providers, case managers, social workers, individuals who work with youth and families on a regular basis. The survey, and then yes, the interviews.
Okay, so how does the recruitment of these teens look like? How are you going to recruit them, and how do you plan to obtain the parental permission for their participation?
Sure. So, you're making a very important point, right? For any teenager that's under 18, of course, we have to get consent from parent or guardian to participate. So the way that we done our recruitment is by partnering with both some of our NYU affiliated family health centers, including the 7th Avenue Clinic, who's been a really wonderful partner, as well as, community-based organizations working within the Sunset Park area, who'd work with these communities on a daily basis and have a really rich history of serving the community.
One of the questions that I asked when I first, asked the questions is, who will this data be shared with?
Sure. So, no data will ever be shared with like family members of people who participate. De-identified data may be shared with only the other research collaborators, for example, ones at NYU. But the overall goal is that, you know, some of these findings we can sort of bring back to discuss with some of our community partners that we mentioned, and kind of think through interpretation of the findings and what next steps look like. And we hope that this is done in, you know, the goal of it is to be done in a collaborative process, and not just for, you know, our team to collect the data and run off and never see anyone again, but to continue establishing us, you know, what the next steps might look like, and work collaboratively on that.
And also, you know, of concern, obviously, is the cultural appropriateness of the study. I mean, is the study going to focus just on mental health issues, or is it going to be health in general? Because health then involves, you know, dietary factors in there. There's also, in terms of cultural appropriateness, there's the language, because you may get some teens that were born here and maybe like 14 years old, and they don't really, you know, they're not that fluent in their own language, and maybe even our language. You know, they may be having language issues. And I guess, you know, language is critical when you're interviewing somebody, you know, for you to get the, you know, the accurate information that you're looking for in the questions that you're asking.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely agree in the sense that, you know, language is very, very important. And certainly, you know, at this developmental stage, different teens will be at different sorts of levels in terms of articulating, you know, emotions, stress, even if they are fluent in English, right? And so there are numerous factors that can influence that, whether, you know, these kinds of things are talked about at home or not, and or at school.
If they are talked at home, what happens in the home stays in the home. You don't go out and bare your soul and tell people what the goings on. You know, this is a very cultural, and I think it's in every culture, not just in, you know, Chinese and Spanish people. You know, it's so that's a factor that has to be considered when you're looking at, you know, at the data that you're collecting, like how forthcoming in terms of the questions, because we, you know, some questions may make somebody very uncomfortable, very anxious, very, you know.
Yeah,
especially when you're a teen. Teens are very insecure.
Of course, yeah. I mean, you know, that's something that I'm sensitive to as a, you know, as a clinician, and having difficult conversations often with both, right, teens, but also adults. It can be difficult to talk about some of these themes and these feelings, you know, for a variety of reasons, whether in part stigma or, you know, there are many factors. And part of the informed consent process, which is really important, of course, in any participation, right, because participation is completely voluntary, is, you know, a discussion of that being a risk of participating in the study, right? The risk of being uncomfortable from the questions or from some of the themes or feelings that'll arise in the study. And so, of course, it's important, and we always convey that to any potential participants. But, you know, and then your other point about, which perhaps I'm reading into a little bit, so correct me if I'm not getting it, but I think you were sort of alluding to maybe, will the results sort of be reflective of a larger population in a community? At least was what I sort of understood from part of one of your questions. Is that,
No, I don't
No,
think
okay.
that, I didn't, because I know that it's, your study is very specific. And I think that you've, stated that, the goal is to try to develop programs. I'm assuming the programs are going to be here in Sunset Park that are going to support these young people that have been studied and their families. It's just that, it's kind of vague with this study, like, first of all, what is the goal of the study other than to, develop programs for these kids? Is there anything else?
Sure, I guess, so there's goals in a few different sorts of layers. I would say the goals in terms of informing, so first is the sort of assessing what the needs are, and the needs, to your point, can come from some of what we see in the study results, which do ask about, like there's a screener in there for some mental health symptoms, for example, but also from interviews and hearing from teens themselves about what their needs are. I don't have any pretension that I have way more knowledge about their lives than they do. And part of, the hope of the study is to solicit from them what they find helpful, how they're dealing with stress on a regular basis, and what would be helpful. And so that's part of why, with the project, I wanted to make sure that we included both conversations with key informants or people who are supporting these families on a regular basis, as well as teens themselves. Because to your point, they're or what I would say, they're the experts in their experience, right? And so,
well, obviously, yeah, because as I said earlier, like the population that you're targeting, these are people that clearly you're going to hear things like, oh, I live in overcrowded housing. It might not be substandard or dilapidated, but it may be like, like we have two, 3 families living with us. There's no room in our house. And my dad, he goes from job to job because he's undocumented. You're gonna hear a lot of, from both of these populations, pretty much the same thing, that they're struggling because of their circumstances. Now, a lot of this is not unknown, which is why I'm curious to find out, like, what this possible discoveries, other discoveries might come of this. Because I mean, the information is out there. We know what the community suffers. We know their situations. I mean, I have a school up the block, and I see, for instance, in the Chinese population, that they're standing on the lines to get food. So I know that they're food insecure. Nobody has to tell me that. I mean, what's happening in the community when you live in the community. So, asking young people, to talk about what makes them anxious, what makes them depressed, because I'm thinking this is like a mental health study, right? It's like, in order to foster resilience or to discover how resilience happens, you have to ask about, the hardship, the trauma, For instance, in the Mexican community where the parents may be undocumented, it's no secret to me. Listen, I'm a social worker. So, for 26 years of my life, I treated not the Chinese population as much, but certainly the Mexican population. And I know, the hopes of the dreamers, right? the hopes of the dreamers, that they can be or help to provide a path for their families, because every day they suffer the insecurity that their families might be taken away from them. And these are the things that bring them to mental health services, among other things. So that's why I'm curious about the survey, because certainly NYU, because they do have a mental health center on 49th Street, where I worked for 26 years, they know this population. They know both of these populations. So I was just wondering, what more can you explore?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think some of what, there's a lot that you said there that, I want to certainly just say I really appreciate you sharing all of that about your experience, your couple decades, both being a social worker, and all of your expertise in that work, as well as being a active community member and service of the Sunset Park community. And I think in terms of, I guess, just to also provide a little bit more specificity in terms of what I was talking about as far as resilience and mental health symptoms go, we know in larger studies that, for example, with the pandemic, there have been a lot of challenges with mental health in general, certainly for teens. And those who are most economically deprived have borne the brunt of that, right? But I think that there are aspects of the unique experience of second generation teens that are not as clear in terms of what aspects sort of foster resilience, in order to better inform what kinds of programs we can develop or use to help support them. And that, it's important to make sure that we hear from them about that, and about what resources they're using now that perhaps there aren't enough of, or that they find particularly helpful. And ones, obviously with teens and any population, there can be a lot of resources or investment in resources, but if they're not relevant, if they're not things that people are actually going to actively use or trust, it, is not as meaningful or impactful.
Thank you. At this time, Dr. Portler, I'm going to go to the questions from the public and the board and the public. Cindy, I see you with your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming to share this research and work with us. I think one of the things we talk about often on the community board is the need for more data and understanding of needs in the community. And so I'm grateful that you'll be doing this needs assessment, even though it may end up reinforcing what Cynthia shares, which is that we do know this community and are well acquainted with the needs, but I'm curious to hear what sort of the teens share as a result, and the service providers. I have a few just like sort of basic questions about the structure and general. So I'm just going to go through my questions. So one is like, I'm new to this. So, who was on your team? If you could share that with us, like how big is your team that's working on this project? As far as recruiting informants, whether it's service providers or teens, what is the like sample size that you're seeking in an ideal world? What is the timeline that you're working with? Have there been comparative studies? Like, are you sort of building on a body of work that is already existing, and sort of how do you see this as intersecting with that? Sorry, that's a big question. So if it's too much, no worries. And then last but not least, I'm the chair of the Ability and Access Committee, which really looks at creating improved access and inclusion for people with disabilities in the district. And I'm just curious about, I did hear that students with disabilities are included in, or teens with disabilities are included in the sample. And I'm just wondering how that recruitment is whether, a lot of times service providers for teens with certain types of disabilities are not geographically oriented, but are instead oriented based on services. Or maybe they're not specific to Sunset Park. So I'm just wondering, is the recruitment all through the service providers? And do you think that you'll be able to include students with disabilities as part of this process? So those are my many questions, but just clarity on the project structure in general. And again, a word of gratitude, because whatever comes out of this, I'm sure it's going to help inform decision-making that we do as a community board. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah. This is, it's funded through a small pilot grant through the Center for Study of Asian American Health and the Population Health Department at NYU. And so we have a small team, which is me and our research coordinator, patient navigator, who speaks both Mandarin and Cantonese. And then the second question, in terms of timeline, which is also a good one, I would say it's a little bit, it's not completely concrete right now. Initially, the plan was to be finishing up recruitment by the end of July. There may be a little bit of flexibility with that. So that's sort of forthcoming. The other question.
I can help you. So one of the questions is number of informants, the number of teens and informants, or is that information that you can't share at this stage?
Yeah, so the overall, initially our plan, I'll just say right now, officially is to have 60 teens, 30 from each group, meaning 30 Mexican American teens, 30 Chinese American teens. And then for the key informants, as of now, it is right now the target is about 10 or so.
And then the other question is about inclusion of teens with disabilities and recruitment. And I guess the last thing is how can we help you? That's another side of this.
Yeah. So in terms of just speaking, I guess, generally about recruitment is done, through some of the family health centers that I mentioned, including 7th Avenue Clinic. And as Ms. Gonzalez had mentioned, also Sunset Terrace, which is actually where I do the interviews. And then in terms of, and then there's also community-based partners, a lot of the big or major CBOs that do a lot of wonderful work in Sunset Park have been really wonderful partners, and similar to all of the knowledge that you were dropping on us, Ms. Gonzalez, earlier, the kinds of things that are so valuable and so appreciated to hear from the folks who have been, doing the work and been so dedicated for so long. And I really very much appreciate that expertise. In terms of specific recruitment for teens with disabilities, we don't have any specific strategies right now for that. I think that's definitely an area that we need to sort of, certainly in terms of going through the analysis of the data, be considerate of and thoughtful about. And dependent upon the findings of this, we can see what the next steps will kind of look like. And being appreciative of both the limitations of the study, as well as how applicable it is for other folks, like other teens specifically.
Okay, thank you. And the one other question was about the body, the sort of what you're building on, like what comparable studies have been done and how this like
Sure.
interfaces with those.
Yeah, so there haven't been too many actually that have done sort of head to head. One of the really one of the reasons in particular why I and the team was excited to do this project is because within Sunset Park, obviously it's the same community, it's the same neighborhood, which is different than some of the other comparative studies that were done in more of a broader geographic areas. There are sort of independently a number of studies that have been done looking at things related to like acculturation, related stress, impacts on family dynamics or family conflict, the mental health effects of direct or vicarious discrimination, including since the pandemic, for example, particularly for xenophobic and anti-Asian discrimination, threats related to immigration enforcement as well. So, I would say more generally, the literature that we drew upon in coming up with the survey was a lot of things that were done sort of separately, but also appreciating commonalities that have been identified in fewer studies, and hoping to sort of build on that to further explore it in a neighborhood where the two immigrant communities live side by side.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any hands raised.
I don't either, Cynthia.
Okay, so then I'm going to ask one last question. Excuse me. Once the study is completed and you're going to consider, programs that might enhance resilience or reinforce existing resilience or whatever, are you going to have a community advisory board to help with this? I mean, is the community going to be able to participate in those programs that you may initiate from this survey?
Yeah, so two really important questions in terms of community advisory council. Even with we are forming a community advisory board for the project from a lot of the community partners that we have. So the answer to that is yes. And then in terms of future types of development of programming or services, I guess is the question just is it going to be like more widely available? Is that the question?
No, I think you answered my question because you said that you have you have community advisory at this level with the partnerships that you've developed for this study.
Correct. Yes. So we'll take the findings back and discuss them with all of those wonderful folks who we've been collaborating with thus far.
Okay. Well, because I think that piece is very important because it makes the community a part of, the outcome. Okay.
Absolutely.
So I don't have any further questions, and I don't see any hands up. So I'm going to thank you so very much for coming and informing us about this study. And, I think it's a great thing. I think that we're going to benefit greatly from this knowledge.
Well, I appreciate you all so much for having me, and thinking of you all and thinking of Sunset Park in particular today. So
thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. I want you to please keep in your thoughts and prayers all of the families impacted by what happened this morning. And hopefully, we won't see a fatality come of this event. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.